In 2011, both of our daughters, Allie and Kenzie, graduated high school in Idaho Falls and chose to attend college at Utah State University together. We immediately fell in love with the campus, Aggie ice cream, and the city of Logan. Both girls worked, went to school full-time, and remained on the dean's list. They were well on their way to graduating, Allie with a degree in technical writing with a minor in classics language with a Latin emphasis. Kenzie with a degree in sociology, psychology, a minor in criminal justice, and a certificate in law and society. Kenzie had interned with the Logan City Police Department in 2013, researching active shooter situations, and had intended to become a police officer. To say that we are extremely proud of both of our daughters is a huge understatement. Over the next few years, we would frequently visit the girls, whether it was for a few hours or a few days. We were your average close-knit family, doing most everything together. It was a comfort for us to know that the girls had each other when they moved away. The girls were roommates all but 1 year. During that year, they lived in the same complex but different apartments. In July of 2014, Allie and Kenzie had come home to Idaho Falls for the 4th of July weekend and returned again the weekend of July 11th to visit with their grandparents who had traveled from Reno to see us. We had a great weekend and even had an early birthday celebration for Kenzie. After Sunday dinner, it was time for the girls to head back to Logan, where they both had to be at work at Walmart the next morning. The 4 of us were supposed to go on a family vacation about 10 days later, so we hugged the girls, told them we loved them, we would see them in a few days, and they drove off about 6:15 p.m. Little did we know, life as we knew it was over. Jim and I were woken up about 3:15 a.m. on July 14, 2014, by the Idaho Falls Police Department, telling us that our youngest daughter had been killed. In my mind, I kept thinking, how could that be? We were told she was a victim of a homicide, and the information they could give us was very limited. My mind was racing as I tried desperately to piece together what was happening. The officer told us that we needed to call Chief Jensen in Logan, so I quickly ran upstairs, grabbed my phone, and immediately called him. At that time, he could only give me a few details, but told me that he had our other daughter, Allie, at the police station. I remember asking if I could speak to her. The chief said I could, but that it might upset her. I definitely didn't want to upset her anymore, so I chose not to. Allie and Kenzie didn't generally hang out with the same group of friends, so why was Allie at the police station? Nothing made sense. What I later learned is that Kenzie was killed in her bedroom in the apartment she shared with 9 other students, including Allie, whose room was only 3 doors away. Shortly after arriving back in Logan that night, Kenzie had gone on a first date with a young man, Johnathon Sadler. Throughout the evening, Kenzie had received some text messages from Jared Tolman, a boy she had previously dated. We had met Jared on multiple occasions, and he seemed like a very nice, polite young man. He had even come to Idaho Falls and spent Easter weekend with our family. Kenzie and Jared met while they both were working at Walmart in South Logan. The texts that Kenzie received that evening weren't necessarily threatening, but harassing. Basically, it seemed that Jared was not happy about losing Kenzie, nor was he happy about her moving on. John decided to stay a bit longer that night in case Jared showed up to bother Kenzie. My guess is they figured if Jared showed up, him and John would exchange a few words, or possibly a physical fight would ensue. What they didn't know was that Jared had already broken into the apartment and was standing outside Kenzie's bedroom door sending the last few text messages. Jared kicked in the door, shooting both Kenzie and John multiple times with an AK-47. Because of the rapid gunfire in the small area, the smoke alarm went off, which woke up the other girls. Allie saw that Kenzie's door was open, but that she wasn't out in the hall with the others. She ran into the room only to find that her sister had been shot to death sitting on her own bed, with her friend John dead on the floor. Because of the previous dating relationship between Kenzie and Jared, this murder is considered domestic violence. Jared then fled to another apartment, seeking a third victim, Eric Larson, who had also become friends with Kenzie. Eric happened to spend the night at his parents' house that night, a decision that likely saved his life. When Jared was unsuccessful at locating Eric, he turned the gun on himself. 3 young lives tragically ended that night. As horrible as this has been for our family, it could have been much worse. We were so fortunate that the other 8 girls, including Allie, and the 2 boys in the other apartment were not physically injured that night. Jim and I knew that we needed to get to Allie as quickly as we could. We gathered up a few things and hit the road to Logan. While we knew she was not physically injured and was safe at the police station, we needed to be with her. We needed her as much as she needed us. We had driven the road to Logan so many times over the last few years, but this time was so different. We were on autopilot and were still in shock as we traveled to Logan. While Jim drove, I was systematically calling family and close friends so that they didn't find out online or on the news. Imagine calling the people you love the most and breaking their hearts one by one with the most devastating news. After the grueling drive, we pulled up to the police station. We had never been there before, but Kenzie had pointed it out to us when she was doing her internship, so we sort of knew where it was. We parked the car, got out, and looked up, and there was Allie standing behind the glass door in her pajamas and a pink Hello Kitty blanket that one of her roommates had wrapped her in. Terrell Warner from Cache County Victim Services was standing there with her. Jim, Allie, and I just sat there holding on to each other. Finally, Terrell took us upstairs to the room that Allie had been sitting in since her arrival at the police station. We are so thankful to everyone who sat with Allie that night until we could get there. We spent about half of the day in that room talking to victim services, police officers, the prosecuting attorney, and continuing to make phone calls. I remember thinking how comforting it was to have Terrell and Jenny from Cache County Victim Services there with us that morning. We honestly had no idea what our next steps needed to be. They helped us contact the university to arrange to meet with someone regarding Kenzie's accounts and to make sure that Allie would be taken care of upon her return. Fed us breakfast, arranged for us to stay in Logan until we could view Kenzie's body upon return from the state crime lab. They were genuinely concerned for our family and did everything they could to comfort us. Over the next day or so, Terrell was able to get a few things that Allie and I needed out of the apartment. With Terrell's help, we were also able to get in touch with Eric and the Sadler family. To this day, we are so grateful for our connection with Terrell, the Logan City Police Department, Utah State University, and CAPSA. Not being from Logan and never having gone through something like this, they have been a true blessing to us. Early afternoon, the chief told us they would be releasing the names to the media, so we knew that anyone and everyone would now know what had happened. We left the police station and got checked into the hotel, which would be our home for the next few days. The three of us were so emotionally exhausted, but had to carry on. We tried to eat, but we didn't have much of an appetite. We went to the store to buy a few things to get us through until we could go home. That evening, one of Allie's friends came to pick her up and take her to her house. I was terrified to let her walk out the door, even though I knew she was in good hands. Jim and I tried to rest a little and began planning Kenzie's funeral and writing her obituary. Allie returned a few hours later. We were so exhausted we tried to go to sleep. Poor Allie had been up since the murders at 12:15. Jim and I had been up since 3:15. I cried so much that day and night, my eyes were so sore and raw. I would continually put a cool rag on them to try to lessen the pain. Jim and I couldn't sleep at all. Allie was able to sleep quite a bit that night. I kept looking over at her and wanting to just hold her, but not wanting to wake her. The next day, we ran a few errands trying to tie up loose ends. We went to rent a trailer to tow Allie's car home. While Jim was hooking up the trailer, Allie and I were standing in the field behind the car talking. Allie finally looked at me and for the first time really cried. She and I just held each other so tight and cried and cried. As I looked at her, I was in such awe of her strength. While at the police station, Allie kept going to wash her feet. At the time, no one thought anything of it. Later, they figured out that because Allie had gone into Kenzie's room barefoot, that maybe it was a reaction thinking that she had her sister's blood and or her flesh on her feet. That night, when we went to sleep, Allie, who was almost 21, asked if she could sleep between us. For the next few weeks, that is how we slept, 3 adults in a queen-size bed. A little cozy, but we managed. The morning we were dreading arrived. Wednesday morning, July 16th. It was time to go to the funeral home to see our daughter. I can't describe the feelings or the anxiety we felt trying to convince ourselves to leave the hotel and get in the car. How could we ever prepare to see this beautiful girl who 3 days ago had so much going for her? We arrived at the funeral home, took a few deep breaths, and it was time. At first, Allie wasn't sure she wanted to go in with us, and we left that up to her. She ultimately decided to join us. The 3 of us walked in hand in hand. I will never forget what I saw that day or what our baby looked like. Yes, Kenzie was almost 20 years old, but she was our baby. There she was lying peacefully under a quilt. It looked like the same quilt we had seen covering her body when the newspaper showed the coroner removing the bodies from the apartment. I knew when I saw that photo that it was our daughter under that blanket because it was too small to be John. I will never forget what Kenzie looked like that day. Her hair that was always so soft was cold and stringy from some chemical used during the autopsy. The makeup she had been wearing was still smeared around her eyes. She had always had the most amazing eyelashes, button nose, tiny ears, and magnitudes of freckles. I'll never forget trying to hold her and feeling where they had cut the back of her head open during the autopsy. After a few hours of sitting with her in that funeral home, we knew it was time to leave, time to head back to Idaho Falls to finish planning her funeral. It was so hard to leave, knowing that would be the last time we would ever physically see or touch our daughter. As we left Logan, it felt so weird to only be leaving with 3 of us in the car. In 2011, when they started college, there were 4 of us. We were a team, a family, and that was how it was always supposed to be. We had no idea how we were going to get through life or how things would be for us. We returned to Idaho Falls, quickly followed by family and friends from around the country. We were amazed at the outpouring of love and support, not only from those we knew, but from so many we didn't. We decided to have Kenzie's funeral on her 20th birthday. 6 weeks later, it was time for Allie to return to USU to complete her senior year. To get her ready, we needed to make sure she could sleep on her own bed. So like you might do when your kids are little, we put her mattress on the floor next to our bed. After a few days, we moved it back to her room and she was able to sleep on her own. The apartment Kenzie was killed in was at the bottom of Old Main, so you can imagine our fear of bringing Allie back to Logan. That first year, while we were dealing with everything else, we felt that we were losing her as well. She didn't want to spend much time at home anymore. Before, Allie was always the one who wanted to stay longer and come home more often. It was heartbreaking and terrifying at the same time. She would come home for the weekend, leave on Sunday after dinner, and I would panic. She probably wasn't 20 minutes away, tears would start to fall. I wondered if the police would wake me up later that night to tell me that something horrible had happened to Allie as well. She completed her senior year, had an internship on campus, and graduated with honors as planned in May of 2015. Allie is truly one of the strongest women I know. We never know when the flashbacks will hit or what will trigger our emotions. To this day, we still struggle sometimes. While life has gone on, it will never be the same, no matter how painful this has been. I don't ever want to forget a single detail about Kenzie as long as I live. The weekend that we took Allie back to school, I found 3 deleted voicemails from Kenzie on my phone. While I was thrilled to be able to hear Kenzie's voice, it saddens me to know that she will never call me again. I want her to be able to call or text me. I want her to be able to put her arms around me and tell me I smell like mommy. Even as a college student, she would say that to me, referring to my perfume, which she jokingly called Ode de Mommy. When the neighbors began setting off fireworks for days on end around the 4th of July, I struggle to go to sleep because I hear them and imagine my daughter being shot to death in her own bed. I look for her beautiful face in crowds and listen for her voice. I've even thought I saw her walking in the rain in our neighborhood. I want nothing more than to have our beautiful daughter come walking through our door and tell us this was all a horrible mistake. I hear John Legend's song, All of Me, and I see Jared kissing Kenzie in the back seat like he did when he spent the weekend with us in Idaho Falls. I look into my husband's eyes and continually see the pain of a father missing his daughter, a man so sad and angry, yet nothing can take away his pain. When I hear the song, I Loved Her First by Heartland, we joke that Jim would dance with each of the girls on their wedding day and realize he will never have that opportunity with Kenzie. I will never get to have that mother of the bride experience with her. I often think of not only the future that was stolen from Kenzie, but what has been stolen from her sister Allie. They should have walked side by side together at USU graduation. Instead, Allie walked alone. They often talked about the trips they would take together after college. They would have stood by each other at their respective weddings, possibly shared pregnancy stories, had either of them chosen to become parents, everyday life events stolen away. As far as we know, Jared was never physically abusive to Kenzie. When we would go to Logan to meet the girls for lunch or dinner, and he would come along, we always figured that Kenzie had invited him. Now I'm not so sure. One day, while Allie and Kenzie were working on a craft project together, Jared just walked in. He had been at work and told Kenzie he was on his lunch break. While he was there, he called in and told them he wasn't coming back. Apparently, he quit that day because he didn't like the fact she wasn't at work. Looking back now, and after talking with Detective Bodley during the investigation and other friends, it appears that Jared was somewhat controlling. When he came to our house in April, I sat and talked with him quite a bit, trying to get to know him. We talked a lot about his family and the plans he had for his future. He seemed like he had his act together and was very motivated. It turns out most of what he had told me about himself were lies. One thing that I've actually come to realize while presenting to one of the male offender groups is that Jared was possibly stalking Kenzie through me. After each presentation, we opened the floor for questions and/or discussion. It came up that basically Jared was using his communication with me to not only keep up with what Kenzie was doing, but to maybe cross-check that whatever she was telling him was true. I had always tried to get to know who the girls were dating, so it wasn't out of the ordinary for me to have contact with him. Jared and I communicated through Facebook Messenger. In fact, 5 days before the murders, Jared messaged me asking if I had any ideas for Kenzie's birthday. He said that he had gotten her a shirt, but wanted to get her something else. Immediately after the murders, Jim and I knew that we could not allow Jared to have any more victims. What that meant was that we could not just sit on the couch, crumble, and give up on life. We had to continue living a life Kenzie would be proud of. We have chosen to turn this around as much as we can and do positive things in memory of Kenzie and John. We immediately set up the MacKenzie Madden Memorial Scholarship at Utah State University, which we are still actively working on growing so that more can be awarded to deserving students each year. With the help of many friends in several states, we have donated totes to various shelters to help women escaping domestic violence. We have amazing friends and family helping us on this journey, supporting us every step of the way. We have people all over who have joined in our random acts of kindness in memory of Kenzie. I have been fortunate to be able to share our story multiple times with victims of domestic violence, male offender groups, students at an alternative high school, youth at our juvenile detention center, legislators, law enforcement, Utah State University, as well as a few CAPSA events. We know that domestic violence is growing and unfortunately will never completely be gone. Together, we need to continue to educate people on the options available to them and remind them that there is support out there. I always tell people that the signs with Jared were not screaming obvious signs of someone capable of such destruction. Kenzie, being a typical teenager, truly believed she was invincible and could handle anything. I always say that I never imagined Kenzie being killed by someone who claimed to love her, but rather in the line of duty as a police officer or on that fast motorcycle she always said she was going to have. Abuse doesn't have to be physical. Verbal and emotional abuse can be just as detrimental. In Idaho Falls, I worked in DV court and at our local domestic violence and sexual assault center. It was frustrating to watch how many times a victim would go back to their abuser. The work that CAPSA does is so important. Victims of abuse are often dependent on their abusers and are often left with nothing except shattered lives. I am continually amazed at what CAPSA offers victims: a safe place, the tools to rebuild their lives and become independent. The support provided is exceptional. I am grateful that CAPSA continues to raise awareness of domestic violence and sexual assault and are proactive in providing collaboration with other agencies across the state, and I'm honored that I have been able to share my story and be just a small part of the efforts to provide a safer community for men, women, and children of domestic violence and sexual assault. People ask me why and how I can continually go and share this, especially with the male offender groups. I tell them that if we can help one person change their behavior or help one woman decide to get out of a bad situation, we have done our job. Kenzie and John didn't stand a chance that night. It is up to us to keep their memory alive, share our story, and help others along the way. Thank you.